Welcome to Strength Chat Podcast, presented by Kabuki Strength. Introducing your hosts, Chris Duffin, the mad scientist of strength, Rudy Cadlove, mature athlete and coach, and the wizard of training himself, Brandon Sen.
On today's podcast, we have Dr. Mike Israetel, and we cover the concepts in his book, Recovering from Training. And we cover the hierarchy or prioritization of those recovery concepts from training within your MRV, passive recovery, nutrition, active recovery, as well as the top of the hierarchy, which would be therapeutic and supplemental. Welcome to Strength Chat with your host, the mad scientist of strength. That's right, me, Chris Duffin. To my left, the wizard of training, the one, the only Brandon Sen. And to my right, back from Orlando, not on vacation, but Dr. Rudolph, our mature athlete and coach. Wouldn't be complete without him. All right, so today, well, I've got I don't know if it's a funny story or maybe an embarrassing story, but I actually met our guest that we're going to have on the show, I think it was about 3 years ago or so in Australia. And I hadn't slept for, I think, 3 days straight, right? And I'm the one with the car, so I'm driving on the wrong side of the road, on the wrong side of the car, haven't slept for 3 days. And
wait, I think that would be the correct side of the road and the correct side of the car. It would be impossible for you to drive on the wrong side of the car.
Different. It was different. How's that? It was the other side.
Okay.
We're in Australia, right?
Yeah, you're upside down.
It's upside down, exactly. I mean,
well,
those flat earthers they say that's impossible. You'd fall off. So
southern hemisphere.
But
water goes down the toilet the opposite way.
So anyway, this is when I met our guest, and I ended up driving him and some other people home like late at night. I remember it was probably late at night again. Hadn't slept for 3 days, wrong side, and I'm just like, I'm loopy from lack of sleep, and I was cutting exorbitant amount of weight at the time. We won't mention the numbers, but listen, need to say I was not in the normal state of mind, and I think I probably had multiple near misses in the car, freaking everybody out. So, and I see Mike might be able to elaborate more. But anyway,
I'm still trying to wrap my head around you driving. You never drive anywhere.
I know. I like getting chauffeured. Yes.
Wow, that's even better news now, Chris. Think we know that you're not a very experienced driver. Yeah, Chad Wesley Smith and I were in the car, and we were making peace with what we had done in our lives to date. And we were ready to go, man. It was really kind of a nirvana moment. So
there's a reason he doesn't drive with us. You guys just weren't smart enough to take the wheel.
So yeah, anytime we travel anywhere for seminars, conventions, whatever, other people always drive. So anyway, but let's get started. He's already said a few words, but Dr. Mike Israetel is on the program today.
That was the punchline.
I was just telling a story. There was no punchline.
And then you guys ran into it.
You didn't crash.
No.
Mike didn't hit his head on the dashboard or anything.
I just scared them, and I'm surprised. He probably thinks I'm this goofy guy that whatever. I don't know.
What a lame story.
I thought it was a brave incident. The thing is, Chris only told us halfway through that he's like, was weaving in and out of traffic. It's nighttime in Australia, and we're like, because he was kind enough to drive us. We're like, so, Chris, do you drive in Australia often when you come in? You're like, this is my first time driving in Australia. We're like, noted, okay. And he's like, by the way, I haven't slept in 3 days. We're like, all right, we're going to die. This is just going to happen. But hey, we got him safe, so.
All right, well, I'm going to go back to my intro.
I honestly think Rudy's probably a worse driver than you.
Well, you're getting that from Darrington. He's a scaredy
I don't know.
He'll take some shots in between cars. We've got a lot of life to live, Rudy. We're not mature athletes.
I'm the most experienced driver on this.
That's definitely true.
I still remember getting an entire coffee down my back from Brady slamming on the brakes of the floor.
Brady's terrible.
Oh,
Brady's not. He's
the
least experienced.
He's the worst.
That was I was not. Didn't I tell him he couldn't drive after that?
That was
pretty.
You have to
I
remember,
wasn't wearing my seatbelt.
I grew up in L.A., Brandon. I can drive.
You drive like you're from L.A. It works. We get there ahead of time. So.
All right.
So who do we have?
I'm trying to do
Who
the
do we
intro.
have on the show today?
Dr. Mike Israetel. He's he doesn't need much of an introduction. Like everybody knows him. He specializes in hypertrophy and diet. He's the head science consultant for Renaissance Periodization. He's a professor at Temple University for gosh darn it, exercise science, and his doctorate is in sports physiology. Does diet consultations as well. I think for the one of the Olympic Committee training centers, and I don't know. I don't need much more than that. I mean, most everybody knows who Mike is. So, yeah, welcome to the show. It's really glad to have you on, Mike.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Excellent. So, you know, it's only been, it seems like maybe in the last 5-10 years. And 10 years is probably pushing it, where, where people have been starting to focus on both diet and recovery, and for strength athletes. I'm not talking in general. I mean, those have been big focuses, but your strength athletes, a lot of that stuff has just been in the past. It was just push through. If you're hurt, you ignore it. Eat a lot. That's all you need to know. More is better. And people have been starting to take more of a noted approach on that. We spend a lot of time, talking about movement preparation and recovery modalities, or rehab, or like return to play situations. That's where we spend a lot of time. One of the things that's really interesting, though, is, and I speak to it a lot, is that people always jump to poor movement quality being what causes injuries, and most people don't realize that most cases are actually overuse. You're either training and you're training too much, not recovering. You're getting too much, stress faster than you're adapting, and we end up leading to some of those fatigue that results in injury. And where I'm going with that is you just released a book, recovery book, and talk about some of the concepts that are in this.
For sure. Well, so the book is called Recovering from Training. And it's all about how to recover from training, which is a very different thing than recovering from injury. I think I mentioned this earlier off air, but a lot of individuals think that they really kind of ignore recovery altogether. When they get hurt, they're like, "Oh yeah, recovery is important," and they start paying attention to it. But they pay attention to it in the context of recovering from injury, not the normal process of training. The thing is, if you can recover well from the normal process of training, you get two really big benefits. One, recovery is critically tied to adaptation. If you're not recovered enough to squat heavy again when you're supposed to, you won't squat heavy again, and then how do you apply overload? You just won't be putting weight on the bar, and that's applied for all the other exercises. And, of course, the second part is if you chronically under-recover and still somehow, by the grace of God alone, manage to get stronger, then, like you said, the wear and tear will eventually catch up to you, and then you will be forced to consider recovery from injury, right? You ideally want to do that as little as possible, right? There's actually kind of three...
People love to talk about these... People love to talk about, this great training cycles and this and that, and they're not focused so much on the long term. Like the longer I can train, even if I don't push it as hard in a training cycle, year over year, you're going to end up progressing a lot further if you're not always having to take 3 months off, 6 months off, that you see happen with a lot of athletes, right?
100%. And I think, we can all do our kind of old man stretches here while we talk about this topic, but Instagram, social media certainly haven't started this trend, but I think they make this trend greater, of athletes with impressive but long-term irresponsible training strategies getting a lot of publicity, where 18 to 25-year-old kids look at these guys and they're like, "Oh my God, did you see what what's his name on Instagram did? It's incredible." And then next week hits another PR, and next week he's like, "I don't need to deload," and hits another one, and you're like, "Wow!" And the technique doesn't quite look right. And guys are like, "Well, he's strong. Who cares? Whatever." And then the rest of us who are older, who have been strong, maybe not that strong, some of us that strong, I guess, and those of us who have been hurt, we don't look at it as much as optimistically as those individuals, right? We look at it and we're kind of like, if he can stay together in one piece, kudos.
Exactly.
But probably not. Like, I'm not taking any bets.
Yep.
So it's important to consider the long term. And I think just really quick back to injury. I can think of at least 4 ways people get hurt in the gym. Out in life, there's, of course, way more. One of them is poor movement patterns, like you were saying. If you have a poor movement pattern, you're just asking for injury at some point. Another one is just bad luck. Like you miss the hook on the monolift.
Yep, straight up accident.
That's it.
Yep.
It happens. It doesn't matter. If you have, if your mind is right, if you have a good setup, all that stuff, freaky accidents happen less. But of course, there's no way to prevent them really. Not being an idiot's a good start, but we all, get caught one way or another. Another one is actually a really interesting one is because I think a lot of people always think that if you get hurt, you did something wrong. And I don't think that's quite true. This is something I actually learned from my PhD mentor, Dr. Mike Stone. He's seen a lot of injuries over the years. He's like 100,000 years old or something like that. And he's been training his entire life. And I asked him about, what is the relationship between overreaching state and injury, right? Like, is it when guys are most fatigued? Is that when they get hurt? He said it sometimes, but a lot of times it's precisely when you are very strong that you are able to have your muscles pull on your tendons so hard that it pops them off, right? So a lot of times people get hurt just because they're on, and they're on a little too soon or a little too much for their connective structures to handle. So sometimes when you see a guy, perfect bench setup, great training, pushes it up at 600 pounds, pops a pec, people go, what could he have done differently? Sometimes the answer is like, you rocking 600 pounds on the bench, sometimes there's nothing to do differently. You got just strong enough to get yourself hurt, which, is part of the thing. But the last way to get hurt is, like you said, chronic wear and tear, even if your movement patterns are good, but you're mismanaging fatigue. You're consistently training a little bit too much for how much you can recover. And that is where the kind of stuff that we're talking about in this book really comes to play, because the book's not going to make you make less mistakes and step on your, have a deadlift bar, smash your foot open or something like that. One of my friends, Derek Wilcox, pretty good powerlifter, he slipped on the rack for sumo, he was putting the weight down and his feet slipped out, and he basically put the bar 700 pounds on all of his toes at the same time. There's nothing learn in school that's going to keep you from doing that. I guess coordination. I don't know. So
you've done that once or twice, haven't you?
Once with 660. It was 7-8 years ago ish.
Yeah, right on the
and
big toe.
It blew up like a grape.
Oh
it's
my God!
It's still not the same anymore. It's fat, and the toenail never grows right. And it was. I was doing 660 for. I did 12 reps that day, but it was on the 9th one. It just crushed my toe. I set it down to one side too heavy, and then I kept going. Anyway.
Oh, that was ridiculous.
But back to the discussion here. And, so the whole piece that you're touching on is not a minor piece. So we recently had Dr. Tim Gabbett on, who's done research in this area, and we didn't cover it in that podcast, but I believe the research is somewhere around 80% of training injuries fall within this realm of what we're speaking to. So.
Absolutely. Either way you cut it, it's a lot, right? And we can talk about injury some other time and subcategorize it differently, but let's just kind of assume, and it's not much of an assumption, it's reality, that your ability to recover day to day, week to week, month to month, and there's actually different ways of doing all of those, does in fact play a big role in not only injury risk, but in just making gains. Because really important to remember, we're not just talking about injury. How are you supposed to consistently push your body to new heights? Because we don't get strong just so we can go in the gym and train heavy. We're training heavy so that we can get stronger and stronger and stronger. How do you get stronger and stronger? Well, you have to make a more or less full recovery between very heavy, very overloading training sessions, so that when you come in, let's say you squatted 500 for sets of 5 last week, a week later, hypothetically, you should be putting 505 or 510 on the bar for 5, or whatever kind of progression model you use. It's got to be more. If you're chronically under-recovering in a big way, recovery literally is defined as a return to normal performance, right? If you can't return back to normal performance, how are you supposed to ascend to a new level of performance? It doesn't make any sense at all. So recovery is really important because, here's another really cool thing of recovery before we get into the details, can really give a lifter. How many times have you guys had training partners that have come in and their program is good, maybe you help them with the program, they're hard workers, And there's some days they just don't have it, but not like just, it's a little off, like in a big way. Like they'll be doing great. They'll do 405 for fives. Next week, 415 for fives. And then the week after that, 425 for like a couple of doubles and a round back single, and they rack the bar and they're like, what the heck is going on? Those kinds of situations happen to everyone. A lot of times it's because you severely under-recovered during some interval, particularly during the week. And a lot of times it's good to ask those individuals, so how has your sleep been? And they're like, well, with the divorce I've been having, my wife tries to kill me in my sleep, so I haven't slept in a long time. And you're like, okay.
That might have something to do with it.
Right, exactly. And it's like, have you eaten? And they're like, well, the wife's trying to poison my food, so I haven't been eating at home much. Right? So in any case, when individuals have a lot of stress going on, et cetera, they're missing out on the big stuff for recovery, then even their otherwise logical training can't be good. So recovery is one of those things that you never worry about it until it's really wrong. But if you are concerned with it, most times you can actually optimize it to have always much better, much predictable, much smoother training, which I think even if, we're not promising in this book, like as soon as you get your recovery right, you're literally going to become Superman. You'll probably fight the U.S. military and win and be king of the world. That's not going to happen, right? If you recover well, your training will just be more consistent. Your injury risk will be a bit lower, and consistent training over the long term is super important. And maybe you folks have been lifting a lot longer than me. How important do you guys think that is? Consistency over the long term.
It's incredible. I mean, I've been lifting for 27 years now, I believe, and that's something I preach to people all the time. Is this isn't NASCAR. It doesn't happen at 200 miles an hour. Try to put the right things in place so that you're making progress over time, and that's how you get there.
Mike, on using the term recovery from a physiological, well, at least in your book, or from a physiological level, what are we talking about in terms of recovery? Are we talking about muscle fiber repair? Are we at the mitochondria level? What are we trying to recover?
I'm not a big fan on science and physiology and all stuff. I mean, I'm just kidding. So, wait, we got the wrong guy here. Hold on a second. I mean mental, spiritual recovery, because the weights hurt our egos and we have to come back. There is actually some of that. After a hell of a squatting session or deadlifting session, like your ego hurts after that. You're like, I need a couple days to figure out who I am again. I don't know, especially high volume training. You're like, you have 8 sets of 8 today. You're like, do I really need to be doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? But no, so physiologically it happens at a couple of levels, and actually the answer is really all levels. So as you train really hard, your intramuscular stores of glycogen, the carbohydrate that fuels most heavy training, starts to go down. So you have to eat enough carbs to bring it back up. Muscle cells themselves and their internal components, the connective tissues around them, take physical damage. That damage has to heal in a variety of ways due to depletion of various substrates in there. The nervous system gets progressively more tired. And on top of that, hormonal axes are thrown off. So as you train really hard for a really long time, your serum cortisol slowly rises, like stress hormones, and your testosterone slowly falls. For those of you taking notes at home, that's just really the opposite of what you want out of hormones. It's really, really bad, right? So the muscle breakdown hormones are going up. Muscle building, recovery, strength hormones are going down. That happens over the course of more like weeks and months. And then over the course of months, you actually, if you continue to train really stupid and not attend to recovery, your ligaments, your tendons, and your bones can start to not recover as fast as they're supposed to be. And then that's one of those things that you'll almost never notice until it's too late. And then it's one of those things like you'll see this with some bench pressers. They'll pop a tricep off during benching, and the doctor will go in there and he'll MRI both sides just for comparison. And he's like, well, guess what? Your other tricep is on a tendon this big. And they're like, how's that possible? Like, when's the last time you took it easy? They're like, never, brother. It's iron all day, baby. And there's no such thing. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. You got to stop doing that because the really bad thing about tendons and ligaments, you actually can barely feel them at all. They're very poorly innervated, and they're very poorly nociceptively innervated, so almost no pain receptors. So, if your tendon is like you've been training very irresponsibly and recovering poorly, and your tendon's on a wire at this point, you may just feel completely normal, and your muscles feel great, and all that stuff, and then you show up to the gym one day and pop, and that's, the pop none of us ever want to hear.
Been there. Don't want to.
And that connective tissue takes longer to repair and to recover than the muscle tissue does, for sure.
So let's
100%.
Let's talk about how we go about managing that. I'm guessing we're going to jump into, talking about managing axial loading, MRV, probably some auto regulation. Walk us through.
Well, that's it, Chris. You actually just did my whole talk for me, man. So that's all I had. Those 3 words.
Co-authored by Mike and Chris.
That's right. So, okay, absolutely. So we actually have it in a hierarchy. We like hierarchies at RP because I think everything priority-wise in life is a hierarchy. There are very important things to do correctly. There are less important, but still notable things. And there are other things that are kind of like extra credit / if you want to be an Olympic athlete, you should do, but most people shouldn't be concerned. Another reason we like hierarchies is because a lot of people have the thing flipped upside down. It's like the 15-year-old kid that comes up to you guys at the gym, and he's like, what kind of creatine should I take? And you're like, kid, forget there are kinds of creatine. Okay? Forget there's creatine. That matters so little you have no idea. It's like, how come you weren't in the gym last week? Like, I don't know, my friends and this and that. You're like, that's problem number 1. Get to the gym. Problem number 2, eat consistent food. And when you're 280 with veins, we can talk about creatine, So it's one of these things where, we like the hierarchy thing, and we have a little primary recovery hierarchy or recovery period. And please feel free to cut me off, or I'll just stop at every level and we can talk about every level. How about that?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, sweet. The very bottom level, the most important core of the pyramid, is what we call training within your MRV, which means MRV is a super simple term, maximum recoverable volume. It's the most volume that you can take in a week, for example, or in a month, any given time, depends on how you define it. It's the most amount of training you can consistently do and still recover from. So training within your MRV means if your MRV is like, can you guys see my hands?
Yeah. We can, but our listeners can't.
Oh, cool. Well, they should just, try to imagine.
Imagine, exactly.
So if your MRV is a certain number, let's say 20 sets per body part per week, if you consistently train at 22, there is no recovery modality that will save you. There's nothing there's no amount of sleep to get or no amount of supplements to take or no amount of nutrition to do to save you if you, no matter what, always push past your MRV. Because as people find out, as they get better with their recovery, what they end up realizing is some people, I don't want to insult any group of people in particular, but I'll call them less than thoughtful people. As soon as you give them like the golden goose, they try to milk that guy for whatever he's worth. It doesn't matter how much bigger the goose is. They try to squeeze his neck harder and harder based on his size. So for example, you say, okay, your MRV currently is 20 sets per week per body part. But if you take the following supplements and you do your nutrition like this and you get 10 hours of sleep or 9 hours of sleep a night, your MRV is going to be 24. And they're like, okay, great. And they start training at 26 sets a week. And you're like, oh my God. So the thing is, the reason that training within your MRV is the base of the pyramid is you can't out-recover training that is fundamentally too stressful for your system. And the thing is, I think we've all been there. It doesn't matter what is on your side for recovery. You can always out-train every recovery modality. So the first thing we want to get across as sports scientists is have a logical, meaningful, not over-the-top training plan. Does that mean it's got to be super easy? No way. Anything up to your MRV is just fine. So if you can't recover from any more than 20 sets per week, anything from 12 all the way up to 20 on occasion and then deload is totally great. You should be training hard. But if you're training consistently way too hard, there's nothing else that's going to save you because, a lot of times people, and I'm sure you guys get this too, will tell you, hey, I'm really having trouble recovering. And what do you think I should do, like sleep and food wise? The first question to ask them based on this pyramid isn't actually anything about telling them what sleep and food they need. You got to go, okay, what does your training look like? And they show you some sheet that's like 15 exercises per day, sets of 20 on all of them. And you're like, okay, dude, but you need to be in Bulgaria to recover from this. I don't know what to tell you.
But I'm following the template of such and such athlete that set such and such record after they'd been training for 20 years to build up to that level. But Brandon, you might want to weigh. I mean, I know you guys, our coaches were just talking recently about how such small changes actually in volume can have a pretty significant impact.
Well, and Mike, you mentioned 22 to 24 sets, and that's not a big swing there. I think MRV seems like one of the more popular topics that you've discussed, and it's something that it seems like a lot of people get kind of right. They're pretty close. So with MRV, are you breaking it up between body parts, between movements? Do you find that certain muscles can handle more than others? Is it a case between a weak muscle or a strong muscle, or is it completely individual specific? Tell us a little bit about what really goes into MRV.
So the answer to all that is yes. You can take MRV very generally, or you can break it down into very, very good specifics. Advanced athletes will eventually, to get their best out of a program, will have to break down MRV all the way to muscles and even to movements. Because, for example, if your lower back gets a certain stimulus from doing back raises and bent over rows, you may be able to do, let's say, 20 cumulative sets of those per week and be okay. That doesn't mean you can do 20 sets of deadlifts per week. Deadlifts might have their own individual exercise MRV because they're so unique in how fatiguing they are. So MRV can be looked at as what is the maximum recoverable volume of your entire body. That can be just sets per body part per week and add all the body parts together. That's also called your systemic MRV because it's at one point like, so basically systemic MRV is usually reflecting of how much the training stress disrupts hormones and other things like that and the nervous system, which have to take care of the whole body. So for example, if you have a sufficiently voluminous program that pushes your systemic MRV or pushes your volume to systemic MRV, even a set of hamstring curls, just whatever, sets of 15, no big deal, is too much and will push you over the edge and you will be overreached, right? So there's systemic MRV and then there's body part individual MRV, right? And actually, Chris, to bring up something you mentioned earlier, a big part of systemic MRV specifically for powerlifters is axial loading. Right, how much compression your spine can take under weight is only an X number, and it's usually the limiting factor, actually, of systemic MRV. Like if someone's legs are just done because they can't squat anymore, you can often put them on the leg press, and they can actually hit some more sets and be okay, and the quads can benefit without just you dying under the squat rack or something like that. So that's a factor. But break it down further into muscles. Your quads have a certain MRV. It's an average number. It changes all the time. Based that you get a lot of sleep, your MRV goes up, right? You can do more stuff. You get good nutrition, your MRV goes up. You get training, your experience with training, your MRV goes up, all that stuff. But anytime you do a snapshot of about a month average, individuals kind of know what their numbers are. So their body part specifics. For example, you may be able to do 20 sets of quad work per week, but anything past 10 sets of hamstring work just leaves your hamstrings like brittle to the touch, sore all the time, and you just get weaker until you get hurt. Like, okay, clearly it's just not 20. So there's body part individual differences, and there's differences between two individuals, right? And this is actually one of the things that in Scientific Principles of Strength Training, an earlier book that we had, we're really big on this. One of the critiques that we offered was having a training partner that does the same identical program as you, even if it's different weights. Because some people's MRVs are so different because most programs have the set numbers put in there, like 3x5, 3x8, and then you do hamstrings and you go home. A lot of times, two athletes will be, let's just give an example. One athlete, that program volume, the average week, may be just a little bit above their MRV, and they're just slowly dying the entire time. Whereas their training partner has 1.5 times the MRV, and that program is never really sufficiently challenging for them. The thing is, MRV is really easy to measure. If you are consistently recovering from training so that session to session or week to week, you can productively train and not feel weaker, your performance doesn't slide down, you're within your MRV. And the thing is, a lot of you folks, I guarantee you guys intuitively know your MRVs. Like if you're training back, for example, and someone comes to visit at your gym and goes, hey, you want to do some more rows? And you've done like a bunch of rows and pull downs, or goes, hey, let's do this drop set, strip set of dumbbell stuff. Most of you will probably be like, I've actually had enough. And they'll be like, why not do more? You're like, because I know what my back can handle, and this is not included in that shit. So it's definitely one of those situations where after you get to know your MRV, training within it is one of those like, are you just being ignorant or are you doing an intelligent thing, right? You know when it's too much. For beginners and stuff, that's why a lot of times I highly recommend coaching, whether it's programming online or whether it's in person. for beginners so that a coach can reel them in as they're learning how to, sense their own recovery. Because a lot of times they'll have no idea that they're exceeding recovery ability, and, months later they have injuries and all this other stuff.
And that's part of what the coach's responsibility is. That's one of the data sets they should be looking at. So, and if you're getting
100%.
started, you don't have the tools or the knowledge really to do that. So.
100%.
How important is it for you to look at increasing someone's capacity in terms of their MRV for like long-term development? Because certainly you don't want someone to stay within that same set range from when they very first started lifting to when they advance. Is it that important for you as a coach or as a training objective to try and increase someone's MRV?
The good news is I think MRV goes up just with normal good training. That's one of the predictable effects of just good training, especially if you have periods in your training which are work capacity phases or hypertrophy phases, which basically work on increasing volume over time or subjecting the individual to relatively high volumes so that when they return back to normal strength training, they're well within their recovery capacity and recovery is no longer a real big limiting factor. I'll put it to you this way. If you are breathing super heavily and throwing up between sets of 5, you did something wrong in your earlier phases during work capacity. Mm-hmm. Or you're grossly overfat and you need to reevaluate your body composition and stuff like that, right? If you're breathing heavy from sets of 3, I don't know what to tell you. That sets of 10, sets of 8, that stuff should be for the work capacity development. And then, of course, your MRV will change, right? Powerlifting mesocycle or powerlifting macrocycle, your work capacity coming into the meet isn't going to be that high. Nor does it have to be because you're doing singles, right? But at other phases, when you prepare for the strength phase and when you're putting on muscle, your work capacity has to be really high. Like one of the most sort of disappointing things to see is someone's like, all right, I need bigger quads. That's what's holding me back in my squat. Coach is like, yes, let's do this volume. And they're so out of shape that their lower back gives out way before their quads do. And they're like, I tried to do 4x8 in the squat. I got 3 sets of 3. I threw up. I can't come off the floor. And I guess I just can't put the volume in for quads. And then you're like, I guess you're just really far out of shape. Now, there's ways to come back from that, but what you don't want is for that to interfere with your strength training. So I think most of that is accomplished through just long-term intelligent training. But if we're talking about long-term athlete development, 100%, absolutely, youth and beginner athletes need more progressions into periodically higher volume, right, to establish their recovery capacity, to establish a higher and higher MRV, a higher work capacity, so that they can eventually do the work it takes to be at a high level. And also that builds a lot of muscularity, keeps them healthy, and I think prevents injury. And in fact, there's some good data to show that if you start training young athletes with singles and doubles too soon, not enough volume work, they peak really fast. It's never quite as high as the ultra elite peak, but then they never go anywhere after that. And it's always it's always kind of a thing. I'm sure you guys have seen this. Like if you watch weightlifting at the Olympics, a lot of times individuals who watch Olympic weightlifting will watch like Junior Worlds, Junior Olympics and stuff. And there's always some standouts, some phenoms at the Junior or like Youth Olympics, Youth Games. And you're like, oh my God, when this kid's 19, holy crap, because he's 15 now and he's clean jerking this and that. Turns out his coach peaked him too soon. By the time he gets to 19, he's got a bad knee and a bad wrist, and he's never doing anything in weightlifting again. So it's absolutely important, especially for younger individuals, to develop that base of work capacity.
So we've got the base of our hierarchy laid with the training within our MRV. What's next after that?
Totally. So next, probably as no surprise, I guess maybe surprising to some, is what we call the grand category of passive recovery. Passive recovery means a couple of things. Passive recovery means that we have its own sub-pyramid, but we're not going to get that far. Passive recovery means a couple of things. It means at the base of that little mini pyramid, sleep. It's not, if it's news to you that sleep is critical for recovery, I don't know what to say. Maybe it's news that you have to lift heavy to get strong or something. Or maybe it's your first strength podcast, so welcome, right?
Yep.
But so sleep is critical. It is irreplaceable. I'll put it to you this way, how irreplaceable it is. If you do everything else right and you chronically undersleep, you're going to go nowhere fast, right? And with other things, it doesn't work like that. Like if someone's like, hey, I've got this recovery supplement, and let's say it really works. And they're like, if you do everything right, but you don't take this magic supplement, you're just never going to be there's not going to be any progress. You're like, okay, clearly that's just not true. Like, it might help as an additive, but it's not a limiting factor. Sleep absolutely is. It's all about average. Consistency matters, right? So you don't want to do like 3 hours of sleep a night for half the week, 12 hours for the other half, and split the difference, and now you're getting a decent amount of sleep.
Brandon.
So consistency.
That's not me.
Oh, I knew the calling out was going to start. When we do seminars about this, inevitably someone turns to someone else in the seminar and starts doing the head tilt, like nodding no, and they're like, "Oh man."
I've gotten quite a bit better.
You've gotten a lot better.
I've gotten quite a bit better.
Brandon's one of those guys. He'll like, if he's got an assignment, he pushes it to the limit to get it done, but he gets it done. But it might mean getting emails from him at 4 or 5 a.m. Because he's been pulling it all night.
That's what happens.
And then,
that's a commendable work ethic. I must.
Thank you.
I must agree.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So
sometimes you got to tell the body to go somewhere else because the mind's got to do its swag, right? They don't pay you to be recovered all the time. You get good money for projects. So, but in any case, there's definitely a balance to be struck there. Sleep, getting enough sleep is good. If individuals want to know how much, the average is 7 to 9 hours. But I have an easier answer than this. If you're not sleeping enough, stop lying to yourself and lying to other people. How do you know if you're not getting enough sleep? If somebody were to take away your Monster cans and you would start to cry, that means you're chronically underslept. If you can't sit through a midday lecture or like a YouTube video without your eyes starting to shut down, that's a sign. People, how like when you it's like evening and you have like your eyes and you haven't slept much, your eyes start to actually hurt, like red eye kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. If you're consistently getting those symptoms, it doesn't matter what the numbers say. You're undersleeping, right? There's no way. It's nodding up over here. Here we go.
Oh, sorry.
So, exhibit number 1, right?
That's the mature coming out of the mature athlete.
Yeah.
That's right. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just old. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not underslept. So that's the thing with sleep. And, yes, can some individuals sleep 5 or 6 hours a night consistently and be just fine? Absolutely. But the thing is, it doesn't pay to pretend you're one of them. Myself, as an example, I need 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night to be fully recovered. Anything more than that isn't really a bonus. I'm just like being super lazy. And also, I can't consistently sleep 10 hours a night. That's insane. I'll just wake up at 5 in the morning and be like, I've had about as much sleep as I'll need for a month, right? And then, of course, the next night I fall asleep at 9 p.m. But
I sleep 9 to 10 hours a night, like
there you
consistently.
Go. There you go. There you go. And it's one of those things like, people are always for some reason really picky. So what's the number? Like, you write it down in a little notebook and go, okay, that's the number Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Israetel said I need to get. It's when you're not getting enough sleep. You absolutely know it. Getting enough sleep is critical. Okay. Any questions about sleep before I move on?
Nope.
That's pretty straightforward. Sleep more.
Very straightforward. It's funny because, not to jab at anybody, but individuals that have a lot of questions about sleep, you're like, folks, it's sleep. You've been doing it your whole life. Mm-hmm. Do it more. Like how to fall asleep and stuff. Those are great questions. But some people are like, well, so when you say sleep, you're like, okay, clearly you're just overcomplicating things. Next one is relaxation, which means it doesn't mean there's other terms for what we think it might mean, but it's keeping a state of low physical and psychological arousal as a default. We all know those people who are always wired. There's always that one lady at the office that's like, hey, did you get those emails? They're like, oh my God, Susan, what happened? Why are you freaking out? And she's always like this, always high strung. That costs you. That costs you chronically high stress hormones. It costs you in your training. It costs you strength. The ideal strength athlete from a psychological perspective is someone who, unless something happens to them directly that harms them physically, is just basically Bob Marley 100% of the time. Chill as ever, calypso music playing in their head, right? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean you need to be non-productive. I think a lot of us mistake relaxing for not being productive. You can write emails, you can write training programs, you can coach your clients in a nice, calm fashion. And in fact, I'll put it this way because I know a lot of coaches listen to your podcast. If you're a coach, especially at a meet, it is your job to set the tone, literally, for being calm. Because if you start freaking out as a coach, what do you think your athletes are going to do? They're like, hey, what do you think I should go for my next attempt? She'll go, oh God, I don't know, how do you feel? They're like, oh my God, that's it.
I don't know how I feel.
Right, exactly.
How do you feel? I don't know.
Exactly. So, it's good to be relaxed and have a good baseline level of just trying as a human being not to freak out all the time, right? Just living your life in a state of calm. Huge, right? The next component of that, there's the others, but I won't belabor them so we can move into other categories. Just one last one that's really important is very related to relaxation. It's called stress management. Stress management is something very specific. It is when you become unrelaxed due to life stressors, right? You get hit by a truck or something, or the boss calls you and he's like, if you don't get this assignment done, Warowitz, you're out of my company, you're done. You're going to publish newspaper articles about how bad of a person you are, right? That kind of stuff happens. You will get stressed, right? You can't just be Bob Marley all the time in the face of that stuff. When that stuff happens, the question is, how do you return back to normal baseline relaxation, and how quickly do you do that? How effectively do you do that? So, for example, if you get into traffic, it's going to upset you, right? California over here, right? You've been LA growing up. You've been through enough traffic to where you're probably not super pissed about traffic anymore. It's funny because you can tell who's from LA and who's not. Because the people from LA that drive all the time, they're usually like a podcast on or the radio, or they got their windows down. They're like, I'm in for an hour, right? So who cares? Happens every day. But the people not from LA visiting, they're like, I can't believe this is happening. What's going on up there? The question is, if you're living in LA long enough, you just don't question of what happened up there. Something clearly happened up there that we're all bottled up, right? And at some point, you have the choice to return to relaxation. So stressors do happen. When you consciously go, okay, I know I'm freaking out. Let me take steps to resolve this, whether they be do something about it or just let fate, decide. Traffic is clearly you can't do anything about it unless you have a tank or something. And then the quicker you come down, the better. And we all know individuals, I think, may be pretty relaxed normally, but they're really bad at stress management. And of course, a lot of people who are bad at stress management are never relaxed normally either. But as soon as anything bad happens, it's nuclear winter, and it takes them days. I don't want to use the extreme of handling a breakup, but, I can even use that. Some people break up with significant other, maybe, like especially college lifters, because I'm sure we coach a lot of them, broke up with a girlfriend at college. It doesn't all work out. And some will be like, yeah, it was stressful. We yelled at each other, but, we end up good terms. And I'm just kind of, doing my own thing. And some people be like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And we'll just for days and days and longer will remain in this high stress state. I mean, I think we all know how that ends up for a training program if they continue to train at all.
Yeah, no, all the stresses in life all come from the same cup, and your body doesn't know the difference. And,
100%.
Anybody that's been in the game for a while knows this. You got a high stress job, your training isn't going to be as good. You got relationship
100%.
issues, it's going to affect you. All right,
Yep.
So what's next on the stack?
So next we have a tie. One of them I won't belabor too long, and the other one is more interesting, I think, to you guys especially. We have a tie between nutrition and active recovery at this next third level of priority. Nutrition is really simple. Eat plenty of calories, eat lots of carbohydrates, plenty of protein, and enough fat to keep your hormones up. Eat regularly so your meal timing doesn't suck, and you're good to go, right? Eat fundamentally healthy foods. There's much more to say. It's in the book. We have a whole other book on nutrition, but those are the basics, right? Yeah. When do people get really in trouble with nutrition and recovery? When they chronically undereat, or when their diets are pure crap and they're not eating enough carbs and protein. If they decided it was a good idea to, drop all of their carbs during a high volume phase and like, oh, I'm trying super low carb and high volume training. You're like, okay, good luck waking up in the morning. Like, if you don't show up to training, we'll just assume you're dead.
I'm doing contest prep and keto. Just
exactly. It's the same time. Why not, right? So it's a situation. So nutrition is really straightforward, and it's very important. It doesn't beat sleep, right? So there's nothing you can eat that means you can not sleep anymore and still recover, but it's a very important fundamental piece. The other piece is active recovery, which really is the question of, it's not like some extra stuff you do to recover, because a lot of individuals start being like, ooh, extra stuff I can do. People always want to do extra stuff for some reason, whereas most of our work in recovery is trying to get people to stop doing more stuff. Active recovery asks the question of, how is your program structured, your training program, beyond just its average number of sets per week, beyond just MRV, how is it structured to allow for occasional periods of recovery? For example, deloads, longer, so like a week long, active rest phases that may be 2 to 4 weeks long, depending on some variables. Taking light sessions when you need them. For example, a really good idea, a good example of what a light session is, or a light work, is in almost every powerlifter's arsenal, and they don't even know it. Here it is. You squat heavy on one day of the week. Then when you deadlift often, or close to that deadlift workout, you'll do some more lower body work, but it won't be nearly as heavy. Is that lower body work enough to really tax you and really make you have adaptations? Not really, but it's a light session in the technical sense. If it's easier, it allows your legs to maintain their muscularity and recover even faster than they would if you just didn't touch them at all for the next time that you squat. And there's multiple other features of a program, like for deadlifts, you might do some light good mornings or from some glute ham raises after squatting, because that's technically a form of light sessions, active recovery for your main movements, right? How those components are structured into your program, how often, how good they are is really important. Here's a really good example. Deloading oftentimes is, a week of easier training. But the thing is, it's been shown numerous times that while intensity, weight on the bar, is very important to fatigue accumulation, volume in most cases is probably more important. So if you squat 515 pounds versus 500 for a single, the difference there in recovery is, notable. If you squat 500 for a triple versus a single, the difference is enormous, right? It's not even close. So a lot of individuals in the past used to make this mistake, and unfortunately still do. What they'll do is they'll say, I have a deload, and they'll think about it in their head, deload, less weight. And instead of squatting 405 for doubles like they normally do, let's say they squat 405 for fives normally, instead of squatting 405 for doubles and then maybe later in the week squatting 135 for sets of 5, what they do is they're like, okay, I need to bring the weight down on the bar because physiology or something like that. But I still want to work hard because the only reason I'm in the weight room is to fuel my ego. So they'll do drop sets with 315 in the squat and 225 for sets of 30. That is not a deload. And the easy way to figure out it's not a deload is after that week, you ask them, okay, so do you feel more or less recovered? They're like, man, that deload really beat me up. I've literally had individuals message me on Facebook and stuff and be like, my deload really beat me up. I'm like, what are you talking about? Whatever you called it wasn't a deload. Yeah. So that kind of stuff is important. And again, I think it's important to note, you can get away with a little bit, not enough of that kind of stuff in the medium term. In the long term, that will catch up to you. For example, active rest phases, right? What's an active rest phase? That's when you go away from training remotely hard. You might not even go to the gym. You might just take walks and, walk your dog and do mountain biking, yoga or something for powerlifters, maybe 1 to 2 weeks at a time, 1 to 2 times a year. Sometimes individuals need longer. What does that do? That lets your bones heal, that lets your joints heal, that lets your connective tissue heal, and importantly, because psychology is tied into this, it lets you heal psychologically. Because you may have a crazy drive and desire for the sport. This sport will take everything from you and more. If every now and again you leave the whole thing behind for 1 to 2 weeks, you come back crazy, craving more strength. And individuals get paranoid because they're like, I'll lose all my gains. Like, you'll be the first person to lose anything measurable in 2 weeks.
Yeah, the people that think they have to have that heavy weight on the bar every week to know that it's still there, like, it's okay. Like, I've taken huge long breaks off of certain exercises and come back, and it comes back so quick, or you just don't lose it, which is you've got to be comfortable and okay with that.
It's I think there's a really good point. I think a lot of individuals have to decide, and this is something I've said before, are they in the gym to get better at their chosen sport, or are they in the gym for pure therapy? Now, the thing is, it can be both, but you got to figure out what trade-off of both you like. You guys know who Kaklayev is, strength athlete. Yep. He'll do things that he calls for the soul, right? He's like, I did like a no-hand squat with 300 kilos for the soul, which is what he's saying is just for the love of the sport, just for whatever, therapy. Like, it makes him feel good. It's not part of his training plan. It's not part of his structure, but he knows that. And he knows that when it's time to get serious and it's not off season anymore, it's contest prep, there's no more work for the soul. There's hit what you have to hit and then go home and relax. Some individuals never quite bring those two apart, and then what they end up doing is, they train kind of how, I don't even mean auto-regulation. I mean, they train how they feel psychologically. Like, I want to smash it. Like, do you think that's a good idea? Yes. All right.
Or there's just the being in the grind of that, that always prepping and trying to move phase. Like, it takes its toll on you over the years. And I have a lot of different, odd little exercises and things I like to do, like one-arm barbell snatches and just other things for reps. And I do them intermittently through the year or in those off-season time frames. And people always ask, why are you doing that? What does that do? I'm like, I like to do it. It's fun. This is how I stay in the game a long time. There doesn't have to be this super scientific, like, that for the soul is like a really good answer. That really is what it is. So
you think that people, if you've gotten responses like that, like, what are you doing? I've gotten actually people asking me about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it relates to deadlifting heavy. Like
it doesn't have anything to do with that.
You would not believe how many emails I got about, hey, why is Chris doing one-arm snatches? Is he trying to get more explosive in his deadlift? I was like, are you kidding? I was like, number one, I don't know why he's doing them. Number two, just think about it. That doesn't work that way.
I think, honestly, some individuals think that whatever it is they want to get most out of you knowledge-wise and inspiration-wise, they make the leap that your entire life must be constructed for the sole execution of that purpose. Mm-hmm. Like deadlift for reps with straps, sumo. That is Chris Duffin's only function in life. And as far as I know, every literal thing he ever does, waking up, wherever he's driving, it doesn't matter where he's driving because he's going somewhere that will eventually lead him to a PR sumo. With that. People lose altogether the idea of balance, and I don't want to sound like this hippy-dippy kindergarten teacher kind of thing where it's like, it's all about balance. It's about grinding it and becoming an effing champion, for sure. But a big part of becoming a champion is moving away from things just for a couple of weeks every now and again and not going insane. And the thing is, the people that a lot of us look up to a ton, the Eastern Europeans, are methodical about this. Eastern European lifters will go, literally after the World Championships, they'll go to like Europe, Hong Kong, the United States, Australia for 4 weeks. They'll travel and it'll be like, hey, do you want to, Chris, you remember the Russians showing up to Australia when we were there, right? Yep. Were they in any kind of shape?
No, they weren't even. No.
They were like, hey, you guys want to lift? And they're like, oh, we have to lift? They're like, yes.
They went out and did some token lifts and yeah.
Is that a GPC?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember being a little disappointed in that performance.
It was their vacation. They weren't there to...
Literally. Mild misunderstanding on the technicalities there. But whatever it is they peak for after that, they disappear for a month. And people think and it's literally like in Russians, there's actually like a term for it. Like when I'm in shape to do this, I can do this. And they'll say, well, I'm not in shape right now. And to some American lifters and Western European lifters and Australians and such, that doesn't make any sense because we've gotten this addiction that we always need to be at our best. I'll even post a video of me. Like I'm sort of like not known. I'm not known for anything, but like I have a decent overhead press and I'll post a video overhead press. And it won't be an all-time PR. It'll just be like the first microcycle of me coming back to overhead press after 6 months of doing other stuff. And then someone will inevitably comment like, Dr. Mike, I thought your best was 275 for 8. I'm like, yes.
Yes.
They're like, what are you getting out of this? I'm like, oh my God. Like, am I just always supposed to be able to do that on like moment's notice? Where is this coming from?
Trust me, I get that. I get that quite a bit.
I'm sure.
You can only post PRs.
It's crazy. So active recovery, it just the real big category there is making sure to periodically let the body rest, recover, heal through your training. And that, mind you, is a really good time to apply those other modalities, and you don't ever want them conflicting. So, for example, somebody deloads, but during their deload, their nutrition stinks. They barely get any sleep. They go out partying all the time. What's going to happen? Purpose of the deload, reduce fatigue. Mm-hmm. What actually happened? No fatigue was reduced.
Yep.
They come back to training and they're like, I still feel like crap. Like, you need another deload. And they're like, what? But I already took one. They're like, do you understand what the function of a deload is? It is to relax you. It's like going on vacation because you're so tired of work, and then on vacation you find like some kind of like casino game you like to play, and you play it and like methodically, and you just Google ways to play the game, right? And you beat everyone in the casino, you make plenty of money, and your wife's like, "So, honey, you ready for work next week?" You're like, what? I thought this was my job.
I need
like,
a break.
Exactly. I need a break from my new casino game thing. And for a lot of individuals, especially high achievers, aligning everything can be tough. I work with some athletes that are jiu-jitsu players and MMA guys, and we try to align their deloading from lifting, at least occasionally, with their deloading from mixed martial arts or jiu-jitsu training. And usually towards the end of that week, they start to go insane. Now, I tell them they're going to go insane, so that's good. That's very antithetical. They're like, wait, so you expect me to get 10 hours a night of sleep? Eat well? Not stress out? Yes. And not train hard at anything I do? Yes. They're like, I'm going to kill someone within a couple of days. I'm like, good. That's what we want. That means you're recovering. As soon as you're ready, a week later, we're going to let the gates open and you're going to go kill and maim or whatever it is you do. That's great. But it takes some wherewithal to align all of these properly and make sure you're doing a good job actually recovering and not just going through the motions of recovery.
All right, Mike, we're going to be bouncing against time here pretty soon, so let's move through what we've got remaining on the hierarchy. Make sure we get everything in there.
Great, super easy. There's only two left. Top is again a tie between therapeutic and supplemental modalities. These are very small details. Therapeutic are things like social support, people caring that you live or die, therapy, perhaps sports psychology, etc. It can be an important thing if you need it. You might not need it, but having friends. Imagine two kinds of training situations. One, you come home and you eat your meal alone in the dark, like Dr. Mike Israetel, because he has no friends. Or you come home to a warm family, people that love you, you joke, you play around, there's a great meal. That actually literally recovers you. Now, does it do a crazy different job? No, but it can matter, right? And then the next one, the one's tied, is, and I'm going to be very clear about this, it's the one that people think is 90% of the stuff, and it turns out to be like 5%. Supplemental recovery modalities, for example, compressive garments, thermal treatments, ice, heat, contrast, etc., and all these other quirky little things that individuals have taken from the realm of injury management, in which some of these are quite powerful, and taken them into recovery from training where they are not. So the huge overarching theme of the recovery pyramid is, logically, don't train more than you can recover from, get plenty of good sleep, stay as relaxed as you can, eat well, train intelligently, deload, light days, rest days, etc. when you have to, and then pepper on top the supplemental and therapeutic modalities you need. Do not think that you're going to buy some supplement that's going to cancel out everything, or you're like, it's cool, man, I don't need to sleep. I've got a contrast bath after this. It doesn't work that way. Is there some stuff to thermal? Absolutely, but it's a very, very, very tiny effect. Maybe you can save that stuff for before really big peaking workouts. So like, for example, it's Wednesday, and Friday you have a huge deadlift workout because the next Saturday or 2 Saturdays from there, you're going to have the World Championships. It's critical that next deadlift workout goes really well from an overload perspective. You're going to have to lift a huge PR. And it's Wednesday, right? And your hips are still a little bit meh.